So we've talked about the state budget that passed the Senate late last night, $50.6 billion. It funds migrant health care costs. It funds pensions. It increases money for K-12 schools, increases money for higher education. Still some unknowns, though. How much is that migrant healthcare cost going to be? What about the cost of a looming union contract with the state? Still unknowns, but the Senate went ahead and passed that measure anyways, and now it's on to the House, where the House is going to take it up for, I believe, second reading today. Late this afternoon, they're going into session at 5. And then apparently they're going to take a break right before midnight and then come back after midnight on Saturday to pass the budget, while all of us are going to try to enjoy a Memorial holiday weekend. But that wasn't the only thing that they approved in the General Assembly yesterday. We were just talking about the measure that limits Illinois citizens' ability to challenge state statutes by not allowing them to file a lawsuit in their backyard county court. Instead, it would require that if you have a legal challenge against state statute saying it's unconstitutional, you have to file it in either Sangamon County or in Cook County. So that was a measure that passed both chambers. Another measure that passed both chambers is a bill that would require by 2030 all state-owned or leased passenger vehicles to be zero emissions. So it could be either electric or it could be a hydrogen-powered vehicle. But a lot of pushback on that from Republicans saying that this idea might make a lot of people feel good, but if you're going to mandate this, shouldn't you know the costs down the road, not just for the new vehicles that are going to be sought to be purchased, but also the cost of the energy that's needed to power such vehicles and whether or not that energy is going to be available by 2030, especially as more people possibly take on electric vehicles and what that could do to the grid. So despite the pushback from some Republicans saying that this bill is way before its time and should not be considered, they went ahead and approved that. They also talked about a bill that would carve out the ability for law enforcement to ultimately have the option of using a drone, a unmanned aerial vehicle to fly over certain high-profile events like special events where a lot of people get together, and it would be allowed to use for surveillance and keeping people safe. But some concerns with the civil liberties groups, of course, saying that they don't want this data to be collected and then to be used later down the road to say, two days after the event, they look through and they say, oh, this person was violating the law. So that was another measure that they advanced to essentially change the state's prohibition of law enforcement using drones for certain things to say, okay, law enforcement can use drones for certain things. So when that first bill about, the freedom from drone surveillance, that passed back in like 2011, 2012 or something, if I recall, and it was a big deal. But here we are. You can kind of see mission creep creeping into where they carved that out. So that was another measure that ultimately passed and advanced at the State House. Altogether, you've got hundreds of bills that's on the governor's desk or going to be on the governor's desk very soon. He's going to be busy throughout the summer, but we still have at least one day left of the House coming into session. Coming up after this call, we'll get to a bill that passed the Senate after I believe it passed the House, dealing with public funds and investors having to disclose what kinds of ESG principles they work into their investing philosophy. So we'll get to that coming up next. But good morning. You're on WMAY.
Morning, Bishop. I got a question about these electric cars they want to put into fleet. So if I'm not mistaken, when we get gas, we pay a tax that pays for our roads, correct?
Yep.
Okay, so when you get gas in an electric vehicle, oh, wait, you don't get gas in an electric vehicle.
Yeah.
So how do they help pay for our roads?
I think, if we talk about mission creep, it could be that you're going to be taxed per mile, which requires your vehicle to be tracked and to report back to government how many miles you traveled, and then they'll tax you on that. That's been talked about before. 10 years ago, they were talking about it. It didn't advance because the public was like, whoa, hold on a second. But with the implementation of electric vehicles, either it's going to be, an upfront cost to taxpayers, you're going to have to pay for your portion of the roads, or it's going to be incremental cost to taxpayers every month you have to pay, or it's going to be a tax per mile. So yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up there. And that's a concern that a lot of people have is if we do go to EVs, how are we going to pay for the roads? Well, the one way to pay for the roads is a tax per mile, which again is a civil liberty concern as to we don't want to be tracked all the time everywhere we go. We'd rather just pay, a gas tax to pay for the roads. 217-629-7970. And by the way, that measure that passed about requiring state passenger vehicles to be EV or hydrogen or zero emission by 2030, it would only impact passenger vehicles, would not impact emergency vehicles or law enforcement vehicles. So fire trucks wouldn't be impacted by this, police cruisers wouldn't be impacted by this, but other passenger vehicles owned by government, state government, would have to be zero emission if that bill ultimately is signed by the governor. 217-629-7970. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning. Not to mention, with the road maintenance, I bet you the average Tesla you see scooting down the road probably weighs 2 to 3 times more than my Chevy Suburban, and they're not very road friendly as far as weight is concerned.
And then you get into the conversation about the batteries and where the batteries come from, and you've got downright slave labor in some of these countries where they're using horrible chemical processes to make batteries or to mine the minerals that are needed for these batteries, and that's a huge moral concern a lot of people have. But another bill they advanced deals with ESG and investing. Here's how that went on the Senate floor yesterday between State Senator Ram Villavalum and State Senator Jason Plummer.
It amends the Sustainable Investing Act to require investment managers, prior to their selection as a fiduciary to a public body or public pension system, to disclose to that body or system how they integrate sustainability factors into their investment decision-making. The sustainability factors include corporate governance and leadership, which also means transparency and reporting, shareholder rights, ethical conduct. Yes, it includes environmental factors, which also include hazardous materials management, human capital. It includes responsible bidder policies, employee health and safety, social capital, data security was included in social capital.
At the end of the day, pensions are to make sure that people have a safe and healthy and stable retirement. I'm not really sure what these considerations have to do with making a return on investment for the people of Illinois. The data shows that long-term, companies that focus on these policies and investment managers that put these policies ahead of traditional investment philosophies generate a lower return over the medium and long term for their investors. So by instituting these policies, what we're doing is we're ensuring lower returns in the medium and long term for the people of Illinois that depend on these investments for a safe retirement. So it might sound good, it might look good in the newspapers, it might make people sleep better at night because it's the philosophy of the week. But long term, this hurts the people of Illinois, it hurts our pensioners, and it guarantees that our investments will continue to underperform the pension systems of many other states.
And despite those concerns, the measure passed. And that's how it goes at the Illinois Statehouse.